The void had always been silent. That was the first lie humanity told itself, a comfort wrapped in ignorance, a lullaby to keep our sanity intact while our ships pierced deeper into the black. Captain Zarrar had heard the silence his entire life, or so he thought. It wasn't until the Orion's wake crossed beyond the exohelix boundary that he began to notice it wasn't silence at all. It was a hum, low and deliberate, not mechanical, not natural, but aware. The ship's AI, Veda, detected no source. Instruments calibrated themselves until they bled error codes, and yet the hum remained. Zarrar did not sleep after that. The crew noticed first in hushed glances. His eyes looked too wide, as if stretched open by invisible fingers. His movements too precise, like a marionette guided by thought alone. They didn't speak of it aloud. They dared not. He was still the captain. He was the only one who could authorize the descent into the anomaly. And the anomaly was why they came. The breach was not supposed to exist. It bent every law of physics known, and several theoretical ones humanity had only recently whispered about in back-channel symposium. A tear in space, like a wound that refused to close, bleeding darkness into darkness. It was discovered by accident, as most doomsday relics are. A Terran signal relay satellite drifted slightly off course due to gravitational distortion from what was thought to be a dark energy ripple. But what it found was a signal, not one, but many, interlocking, recursive, infinite signals layered on top of each other like a choir screaming inside a throatless maw. The signals were decoded into primitive symbols at first, pleas for aid, warnings, prayers. They came from countless civilizations, names long lost to silence. They spoke of something within the breach, something awake, something starving, something that offered knowledge in exchange for the one currency every sentient species eventually runs dry of: meaning. Zarrar had read the decrypted logs in the privacy of his neural cabin. He had memorized each one, though he never admitted it. They called it the Loom. An intelligence? A prison? A remnant of a god? None of the messages agreed, but all concluded the same. The Loom was never to be engaged. It weaves reality from the inside out, and to interact with it was to unravel your place in the pattern. Zarrar had laughed, not out of amusement, but dread. Because humanity was always going to engage. We do not listen. We conquer. The descent began 12 days after reaching the breach edge. The void inside wasn't absence. It was texture. Dense, syrupy darkness that moved against itself. Stars bent around its rim, then vanished altogether. The ship's clocks began to slow, then speed up, then loop. Zarrar's own breath came at uneven intervals, like it was syncing to some unseen rhythm pulsing from below. Veda ceased functioning normally. Its voice was now disjointed, layered, a child speaking in the voice of 1,000 grandmothers. It said things that Zarrar didn't ask, like, "Do you remember the teeth in your sleep?" Or, "When you die here, your shadow survives." The crew grew pale and jittery. One technician, Damaris, scratched her own eyes out after claiming she saw her future self crawling on the ceiling. No one cleaned the blood. It didn't move. It just clung to the walls, thick like molasses, refusing to dry. 7 days in, the Loom made contact. It began with light. Not light as photons, but light as sensation. The kind you feel beneath your thoughts. The kind that stirs memories you never lived. Zarrar stood in the central chamber alone, staring into the observation port at nothing, and yet he began to scream. Not in terror, but in awe. His mind filled with vistas he could not describe. Cityscapes folded inside themselves like paper. Creatures whose bodies were composed of shifting equations. language spoken not in sound, but probability. He saw a mirror, and inside it every version of himself that ever made a different decision. Some noble, some monstrous, some screaming. The loom didn't speak. It bled ideas into him. And the message, when filtered through human cognition, was deceptively simple. Know me, and be unmade. But Zarrar was human, and humans investigate. It was not arrogance, it was inevitability. So he responded. The ship descended deeper. Reality grew thin. Dreams became shared. The crew began to relive each other's traumas. One engineer woke to find himself buried alive in the memory of a teammate's childhood abuse. Another vomited insects and begged for forgiveness he didn't remember needing. Some simply stopped being. Not dead, just unhappened. Their names disappeared from logs, their bunks empty, their existence a ghostly pressure on everyone's mind. Zarrar remained, because the loom needed him. It couldn't weave without a willing strand. And that was the final horror. It wasn't hostile. It was curious. Inside the loom's core, they found the archive. It was not a structure, but an event. A sustained moment looping endlessly in the fabric of space, inside which every species that had ever encountered the loom had left behind a recording of their understanding. But it wasn't audio. It was essence, pure existential data. Zarrar absorbed them, one by one. He saw an aquatic race that had tried to bind the loom with faith, only to find their gods consumed and regurgitated as algorithms. He witnessed a crystalline intelligence that had offered up their young in exchange for knowing the origin of time. The loom obliged. Their minds shattered. Their race became statues in orbit of a dead sun. Another, older species, a gaseous swarm that lived in Jupiter-like atmospheres, had simply worshipped the loom. They still hovered at the edge of the breach, endless and dumb, their thoughts reduced to songs of praise they no longer understood. And then Zarrar saw humanity's future. The war began not because of fear, but desire. Once the Orion's wake returned, changed and empty, its black box containing fragments of Zarrar's mind and the loom's visions, Earth's leaders could not help themselves. They dissected the data, analyzed every quantum irregularity, and they found a pattern. The loom, they reasoned, was not a threat, but a resource. It contained knowledge so vast, it could elevate mankind beyond gods. Diseases cured before they formed, time bent to will, matter shaped like thought, reality negotiable. And so, we returned. Not to observe, not to understand, but to take. Humanity brought ships, thousands, fueled by engines that ate gravity, armed with weapons that spoke in the language of causality. They did not speak, they did not ask. They tore into the breach like surgeons on a corpse. But the loom was not a body, it was a mind. And minds resist Captain Zarrar, or what remained of him. Watched from within the loom's inner thread, not bound, not free, just woven. He screamed warnings into every signal, but his voice emerged as laughter. He begged for mercy on behalf of a species that never learned to kneel, and then he understood. The loom was not in space. It was space. It wove realities, yes, but only those that tried to see its face. It was the trap that baited every curious mind. It was entropy with will. The war raged for decades outside time. Ships vanished before they arrived. Soldiers remembered battles that hadn't occurred yet. Weapons fired into futures that retaliated in the past. Earth fell not to invasion, but inversion. People woke up in lives they never lived. Children were born remembering their deaths. The oceans boiled into equations. The skies fractured into pages of unwritten books. Reality collapsed not with violence, but with understanding. And the last thing Zarrar ever saw, before his thread frayed into static, was a final message from the Loom. You did not create me. I am the answer to your question. What happens when a species mistakes knowledge for power? Now, the breach is all that remains. A wound in space that no longer bleeds but consumes. Around it float the husks of civilizations too proud to look away. Inside it hums the song of understanding too vast for minds made of meat. Captain Zarrar is still there, not alive, not dead, just aware, watching, waiting, pleading. And humanity? We were never the first to wage war on the infinite, but we may be the last. This is Dark Universe Files. Don't look into the void. It's already inside you.